NASA engineers have designed and built some amazing telescopes, satellites, and space probes, looking out to the far regions of the Milky Way and the universe. But some of the most important things they monitor are right here. Looking back at us from space, NASA's Earth Observing System is helping to preserve our world's natural resources. NASA's Earth Observing System plays an important role in the recovery efforts of a vital ecosystem, the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake is an estuary, a partially enclosed body of water where fresh water mixes with the salt water of the sea. The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the U.S., stretching more than 300 kilometers from the top of Maryland to the Atlantic Ocean in Virginia. It holds about 57 trillion liters of water and is the home of more than 3,600 species of wildlife. But human impact has changed the bay, and it isn't as healthy as it once was. To better understand those changes, bay managers monitor the Chesapeake, and that's where NASA helps. The agency is using satellites like Landsat, MODIS, and CWIFS to keep an eye on the bay, collecting data that scientists use to monitor its conditions. Scientists analyze the data to understand the changes and predict what might happen in the future.
We monitor the satellite data over time to see how things are changing.
Eric Brown de Colston is an associate research scientist with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He works at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. 4 centuries of population growth have crippled the bay, harming water quality and threatening the species that rely on clean water for survival.
This image was put together by hundreds of different images of Landsat. We're trying to put together a mosaic of this whole region over time.
Most of the pollutants in the bay come from the watershed. Polluted runoff from the Chesapeake Bay's watershed causes eutrophication.
Eutrophication is a process that ultimately diminishes oxygen levels in the water.
Jackie Harmon is a Virginia oyster restoration specialist for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
What happens is we have excessive algae blooms that are generally fueled by nitrogen that comes into the bay. Nitrogen a lot of times is used as a fertilizer on the land, and it does the same thing in the water that it does on the land. It makes plants grow. And the Pacific plant that it really fuels growth for in the bay is algae.
So the algae consume the nitrogen, grow, and eventually die. The decomposition process consumes oxygen in the water.
That's a major issue because the oxygen that the bacteria in the decomposition process are using is the same oxygen that the fish and the crabs and the oysters need to live.
Water with a low concentration of dissolved oxygen is called hypoxic. And hypoxic water is not a good environment for wildlife.
So it makes it very difficult for other animals to survive in areas where there's low oxygen, and ultimately it becomes referred to as a dead zone.
The Chesapeake Bay Foundation has been measuring the health of the bay since 1998. Each year, officials grade the bay on a 100-point scale. A score of 100 would equal the pristine state of the Chesapeake, as Captain John Smith explored it upon arriving in the New World in the 1600s. The numbers correlate to a letter grade. For the last few years, the bay received a 28, a D.
Overall, the bay is pretty sick. It's not saved. We know how to do it. It's going to take a lot of action on the land as well as things done in the water like active restoration. But we still have a ways to go.
So while the path to a healthier, more productive Chesapeake Bay is still long, NASA and its partners through satellite missions like Landsat and CWIF are helping to make that journey possible.
Listen all y'all, what I'm about to say. It's time we get together to save this bay with a creature that's been around for thousands of millennia. It goes by the name Crassosteria virginica. Some people eat them. The bay really need them. They're chilling underwater as their filter feeding. There are so many cool things oysters do. The reefs are habitat for an underwater zoo with gobies, linnies, oyster-toed fish, crabs and eels and worms and shrimp. You say you have a hard time believing this? You can trust me, I'm a specialist. Go and spread this message all across the nation about a funky new science called oyster restoration.
Local inhabitants of the Chesapeake Bay are reaching out to their neighbors with the offer of a lifetime. Help rebuild the bay's oyster population, and we'll send you 24 oysters a year for the rest of your life. One oyster purifies up to 50 gallons of water a day naturally. Rebuilding their population will help save the delicate but infinitely beautiful home these locals share, and we all treasure. And for that, the locals will be eternally grateful. Order today at oystersforlife.com, the Oyster Company of Virginia. Oysters for Life.